3 British aid workers are dead in Gaza, hit by an airstrike while doing their jobs. Israel insists they were not intentionally killed, but will there be any accountability? Downing Street has demanded answers after an appalling incident, and it summoned the Israeli ambassador. While colleagues shed tears, there is global condemnation after several people from Britain, Poland and Australia were all killed. So can we have faith in the investigation that Israel has promised? I'll ask the UN's aid coordinator in Gaza. Also ahead, weapons of war, bomb attacks and teenagers turning into hitmen. A special report on the gangs of Sweden.
I've seen people getting shot, I've seen people die, people getting hurt, mothers crying in despair.
The dynamite was placed here?
Yeah, between the both houses.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Do you feel like Sweden is a bit at war with the gangs?
Yes.
Who's winning?
We.
Do you think the gangs think that?
No.
Questions over immigration and integration. We debate the possible solutions for Sweden out of its crisis. And finally, the rich getting richer. In a world of woes, why is the number of billionaires going up? And just who is the richest person in the world? That's all coming up on The World with me, Adam Parsons. A very good evening. Well, there's been an outpouring of fury today after the deaths of 7 aid workers in Gaza, 3 of them British. It's natural that the government here in Britain should express that sense of anger and demand answers from Israel, which says it has launched an investigation into why this attack was carried out. The problem is, it's going to be just about impossible to verify that explanation if and when it comes. Expect to hear a version of fog of war. Accidents can happen. What we do know is that the convoy of 3 vehicles appears to have been deliberately targeted. One of the cars has a very neat circular hole in the roof where the projectile crashed in, killing all those inside. Israel, it seems, simply attacked the wrong people by mistake. Now, one of those wrong people was the Australian, Zoe Frankham, on the left here, who's been named as one victim. She's not the first aid worker to be killed. The total who've died in this conflict is now over 200. But beyond the public and political anger, and after the deaths of tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians, will today's attacks actually move the dial of global opinion? That is a question we'll be asking here tonight. First, though, here's our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle.
The missile went straight through the roof of the armoured vehicle, shredding the charity's identifying logo, like a dart hitting a bullseye. Further down the road, the 2 other vehicles in the convoy were picked off, one by one. 3 precise hits on 3 separate cars. All 7 passengers were killed, among them 3 Britons, confirmed by World Central Kitchen and the British government.
Hey, this is Zomi and Chef Olivier. We're at the Geopolitical kitchen.
Australian Zomi Frankham was also among the dead. Her Prime Minister has demanded answers.
Australia expects full accountability for the deaths of aid workers, which is completely unacceptable. Aid workers and those doing humanitarian work, and indeed all innocent civilians, need to be provided with protection.
Their bodies were taken to Al-Aqsa Hospital near Gaza City, where they were identified by colleagues. Israel has now admitted responsibility for the strikes and launched an investigation.
Unfortunately, in the last day, there was a tragic incident of an unintended strike of our forces on innocent people in the Gaza Strip. This happens in war. We're checking this thoroughly. We're in touch with the governments, and we'll do everything for this not to happen again.
The 7 aid workers were leaving the charity's warehouse in Deir al-Balah, where they had just unloaded 100 tons of aid. The 3-car convoy was travelling along this coast road, one of the main highways heading through the Strip. Sky News has geolocated the wreckages of the cars to these 3 locations.
as humanitarian workers, we're here trying to do our job, but we are continually being hampered every step of the way. If you put the pieces of the puzzle together, we're not getting enough aid in. We are unable to properly move throughout the Gaza Strip to get that aid that we do get in to the people that need it. And while we're doing that, we're at risk of being killed.
Devastated Palestinian colleagues comforted one another as the news reached them. World Central Kitchen gave out food to Israelis following the October the 7th attacks and has been one of the biggest providers of aid in Gaza during the war. But it has now suspended its operations following the airstrikes last night. And today, aid ships bound for Gaza were turned back to Cyprus. That will have an immediate impact on the thousands who desperately rely on their food. Alistair Bunker, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Well, with me in the studio tonight, the Independent's chief international correspondent, Belle True, and the former UK ambassador to the UN, Sir Mark Lyle Grant. But I'm going to start with you. Just a few weeks ago, you interviewed Zomi, one of the victims of this attack. Obviously, you know the charity. Just tell us, what was she like? What sort of work was she doing?
Well, it was quite extraordinary because we were on the tarmac of a Jordanian military base, ready to board an enormous military plane packed full of aid to drop it over northern Gaza. And Zomi was there because WCK, World Central Kitchen, had at least 16 pallets of food on that particular airdrop that was coordinated by the Jordanians. And she was just full of this enthusiasm. And she said to me repeatedly, we have to find every way to get aid into Gaza. We've got to get the food to the people of Gaza. We know, according to the UN reports, that there are over 1 million people in Gaza who are in extreme levels of hunger. There is very limited ways to get food to them, particularly in the north, where there's at least 300,000 people who are suffering, extreme levels of hunger. And so she kept repeating to me, she kept saying, we will do this in any way that we can, whether it's from the sea, the air, or from the land. And she was involved in all of those efforts. And so my immediate feeling from her was just one of never-ending passion and enthusiasm. And it's just absolutely heartbreaking that this news came today, because she was coordinating aid that was coming in from the sea after she'd obviously done these airdrops in North Gaza. And I mean, just to add to that, it shouldn't be that way. There are land crossings which are far safer. They could be opened if the Israelis wanted to open them. You could get their aid to people who needed it quickly, especially if there was a ceasefire. It wouldn't require people like Zomi to take such big risks.
I mean, Mark, when you hear a personal testimony and you put a real person to the name in this litany of so many victims in this conflict, it changes the way we talk about it. But do the events of today actually move the dial in the geopolitics of the world?
I'm not sure it will, Adam, sadly. It's a desperately tragic situation. And clearly it will increase the pressure from Washington, from London, other capitals, on the Israeli government to allow a humanitarian ceasefire, to allow new entries for aid into Gaza, as Belle was saying. But I'm not sure that this in itself is actually going to change the trajectory of this conflict, or indeed bring an end to this conflict, because Benjamin Netanyahu is determined to defeat Hamas militarily. He believes that a land offensive against Rafah is essential in order to do that. He hasn't achieved any of the sort of main military objectives he set out right at the beginning of this crisis. And so I don't think it's going to change the Israeli government's attitude. I think a bigger potential shift of the dial, if you like, is the Israeli attack against the Iranian consulate in Damascus, because that is an escalation by Israel. That is a breach of international law. And the question is, how will Iran react? They have said they're going to respond. If they decide to escalate further, then this conflict widens across the region. That would change the dial.
We've heard this kind of threat of escalation. I mean, Bella, one thing, going back to the attack today, the IDF have said they will investigate. Mm-hmm. They say it's an accident. Mm-hmm. Do you think the world trusts them to investigate this? And frankly, what if they don't? Where's the backup plan?
Well, I think a lot of the humanitarians that I'm speaking to on the ground and also Palestinians would say they don't trust them to do an independent investigation. You know, first of all, this was not the first attack on aid convoys. I know this is one that's hit the news, and I think because the levels of fatalities...
200 deaths of aid workers.
Yes, absolutely, and a number of convoys have been hit. I was just talking to UN officials earlier today with the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency. In February, one of their aid convoys full of food on the same road in the same area in Del Baha was also hit with a naval shells, what they told me. So it's obviously not the first time this has happened. And I think the concern is that so-called investigations haven't come to anything. So I'm specifically thinking about the killing of journalists in southern Lebanon, the Reuters correspondent, Issam, who was killed, and a number of other journalists who were injured. Now, according to Reuters, they've done investigations and they believe that this was Israeli tank fire. That is still pending, according to the Israeli military. So I think the concern is that they need an independent investigation. But that would require there to be access to the ground and obviously a ceasefire so people could to see the evidence.
Mark, I'm going to have to get a snappy answer from you on this, but the game changer in this is if the Americans lost patience. Any sign of that?
Well, no, you've seen the reaction from the White House. I mean, the Americans are losing patience. There's no doubt the language has toughened up, both in private and in public. But the game changer would be if the Americans said, because Israel has now crossed a red line, it's breached international law, we will no longer supply weapons to Israel. That would be a game changer. But from what we heard of the White House today, that is most unlikely to happen.
Yeah, much more emollient words. For the moment, thank you both very much indeed. So can the UK trust that there's really going to be a thorough investigation into the airstrike? I've been speaking to the UN's coordinator for humanitarian aid in Gaza, Jamie McGoldrick.
I'm obviously really appalled and shocked by what's happened. It's obviously a very dangerous working environment, but when these things happen, it just puts you in a position you think, well, why are we here and why are we not being supported better than we are at the moment?
The IDF has said it is going to investigate, that it will be a thorough investigation. Do you believe that?
Well, yeah, in a way I do, but this is not an isolated incident. I mean, we've had many other incidents of this kind, not as severe as this, obviously, but premises, offices, houses, even vehicles have been targeted. And there were investigations, but to be honest with you, they've never actually come to anything that's actually changed the way things happen.
There is, of course, a profound difference between people working in conflict zones who get killed by accident and people working in conflict zones who are killed deliberately. Do you have suspicions that these vehicles were targeted on purpose?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a mistake because there have been many mistakes in the past as well. We've had other vehicles hit, obviously not to the same tragic outcome as this one. So, I mean, it has happened before in that sense. And so what we are saying is that there is a system where we notify and we coordinate with the Israeli Defense Force for movements within Gaza. And unfortunately, some of the situations end up being poor in terms of how they're managed and poor in terms of this today was the worst ever. You could never imagine. But we've said to the Israelis before, we've warned them to say that we are one incident away from being in a real catastrophic situation in terms of humanitarian response. And that's what's happened.
But what can you actually do? I mean, that's what intrigues me is people say, well, this is unacceptable. But actually, on a practical level, you're just going to have to work with the situation you've been handed.
Well, I mean, that is the case, but then what we hope is when there's an incident of this kind or other incidents that have been the case, we tell the Israeli Defense Force, look, this is unacceptable. You have to create a conducive working environment. It's your responsibility as an occupying power to make sure that our safety and security is paramount. But that's not happening because for them, what's paramount is the actual war aims and the military objectives. And we are almost like an occupational hazard for them. And we're the second class. And that's unacceptable because we're there to save lives caused by the hostilities that have been undertaken by the Israeli authorities. And the World Central Kitchen was one of the key components of us addressing the imminent famine in the north. I mean, you've got them, they've got 60 community kitchens that they've done 35 million meals, hot meals for people who are starving. And now that's jeopardized because they've paused. And others will now start to think, how safe can this be? And the Israeli authorities know the value of the humanitarian response for the crisis that's there. And if they have to do better than they're doing right now to make the situation better for us to do our work.
I want to ask you just about that famine relief. An Israeli government spokesperson told Sky News today that there have been a number of reports suggesting an imminent famine. We do not believe that to be the case, and said that the reports were based on old, out-of-date information. Do you think famine is imminent?
I think the reports show this, the technically world-renowned and respected reports of the integrated phase for the Famine Committee has shown quite clearly 70% of people in the north of Gaza are facing imminent famine. I was there last week and I went to the Kamal Adwan hospital, and every single child in that hospital from the age of 8 down to 2 was facing serious acute malnutrition because we don't have food for the families and we don't have therapeutic feeding for those people who are in real danger. It's like skeletal children lying in bed. So to say there is no famine there is, I would say, is even delusional.
Was Jamie McGoldrick speaking to me. Right, let's talk now to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, joins us from Jerusalem. And first of all, Alistair, what is the latest that you have heard about this attack today?
Well, I mean, the facts as we know them and as we can establish them is that late last night, this 3-car convoy was travelling back from a warehouse where it had dropped off humanitarian supplies. It was travelling back down towards Rafah, and they had coordinated their moves with the Israeli military in what's known as a sort of deconfliction process. That's something that the aid organisations in Gaza go through. It's something that aid organisations and news organisations around the world in conflict zones often do in order to make sure that, well, in the case of Gaza, the military knows what they're doing, where they are, and essentially approves the move in order that they are not targeted in any way. That didn't happen. 3 airstrikes on the 3 vehicles. The Israelis say it was an accident. I think that clearly there was incorrect intelligence. We don't know why they decided to fire on these vehicles. Perhaps they thought they contained Hamas fighters. Perhaps they misidentified them. That will be something that has to come out in an investigation. But what we know is that the decision to strike each vehicle one by one by one was deliberate and can hardly be described as an accident.
And Alistair, how worried do you think the Israelis are that this could erode, even if slightly, international support?
Well, I think you can always get a sense of the mood internally in the Israeli political apparatus gauged on how quickly they react to something. And they did come out quite swiftly today and firstly said they were looking into it. They didn't admit responsibility. Then Netanyahu came out and did say that it was the Israelis' fault, albeit an accident. They have spoken to all the nations involved. Rishi Sunak has spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu tonight and told him that this strike was unacceptable. It's not going to deter the Israelis from their main mission, and that is defeating Hamas. I think it'll be just a mere blip in their war campaign. I think if it is going to have anything more profound in terms of consequences, that is going to be up to the likes of the British, the Americans, and others who might be able to have influence on the Israelis. And one other area where it could be consequential is the delivery of aid in Gaza. There are not many charities queuing up to make the dangerous journey to deliver aid. World Central Kitchen was one of them, and tonight they've suspended operations and others might follow. And if they do, it will be down to the Israelis as the occupying force to sort that issue out.
And we will be keeping an eye on that. Alistair, thanks very much indeed. Alistair Bunkle there, live in Jerusalem. You're watching The World with me, Adam Parsons, and still to come, the EU's homicide hotspot, a special report on how gang violence has spiralled in Sweden, leaving it with the highest gun murder rate in the European Union. I'll be joined by a former gang member who's working to drive young people away from violence.
We're here to talk about climate change.
OK, tell me.
And wines. There's a recent article, I think in the Times, that came out And it was saying that in sort of as little as 20 to 30 years, we won't be drinking Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay. We'll be drinking completely different grapes.
Don't be ridiculous.
Yeah, apparently so. I think there's a lot of scaremongering, but this is from the Loire.
Okay.
So cool climate, France. This is the spiritual home of Sauvignon Blanc. Absolutely lovely. This is from England. So this is Sussex, East Sussex.
Oh, sparkling.
Yeah, sparkling. But it goes to show, with climate change, it's all about countries like England.
It's cold as well.
It's definitely the temperatures are going up, and it's been proven. But it's saying, it's shocking the way, they're saying in sort of by 2070, it could be as much as 3 degrees hotter than it is now.
Goodness.
And
so what does that mean for wines like this?
So wines like this, so we'll be looking at other...
This is from France?
This is from France.
Yeah.
So we'll be looking at potentially other grapes being grown in France. So more Mediterranean varieties, for example, who are better suited to more arid conditions, Greek varieties, so anything. So the Sauvignon Blancs and the Chardonnays...
Santorini, actually, that's the...
Oh, my goodness, you're absolutely right, because that's one of the most hostile environments for growing grapes. And they've nailed it with Assyrtiko, lovely, beautiful white wines. So I think it's probably that. So the Americas, California... Instead of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, we'll be drinking things like, Touriga Nacional from Portugal, which is one of the key ingredients in port, for example. So reds as well. So the thing with, the hotter it gets, the higher the sugars in the grapes, so higher the alcohol as well, but the lower the acidity, which is not what you want. You want something with, even for reds, you want something with a good acidity because it's essentially the structure of the wine. So you don't want the alcohols to be too high.
Think of Sweden, you probably see a picture of serenity in your mind. But right now, this is a country with a big problem, with gangs. Nowhere else in the European Union has more murders from gun crime. Its death rate is roughly 25 times higher than in London. So how did it become a homicide hotspot? Well, tonight we're going to hear from gang members. What is driving people, mostly youngsters, to kill? One gang member tells us he earned around £150,000 for taking on hit jobs. Demand for money and drugs is stirring up violence involving some pretty serious weaponry. That's Soviet-era machine guns to state-of-the-art handguns, and even sticks of dynamite being used to blow up people's homes. And pitched against all that, the police. We've joined units patrolling the streets and facing a mammoth challenge, with around 62,000 people now linked to criminal networks. The police tell us a failure of integration is to blame, while statistics suggest it's deprived migrant communities who are bearing the brunt of all this. So what is the solution? Well, politicians are moving to strengthen gun control laws. There's also talk of lowering the age for sending someone to prison. Is that punishment going to deter people? In a moment, I'll speak live to someone who lived the gang life. But first, this special report from our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
We have automatic weapons, we have semi-automatic weapons, we have 3D weapons.
Weapons from former wars are among those used by gangs in their urban battle, a battle where children become killers.
How young could someone be who's using this in a gang?
We're talking about very, very young people who could be 13, 14, 15 years old.
Violence began spiralling in 2022. Now Sweden has the highest gun murder rate in the EU. More than 360 gang-related shootings were recorded last year, 53 of them fatal.
I've seen people getting shot, I've seen people die, people getting hurt, mothers crying in despair. I've seen almost everything, but there's nothing you can do about it.
A child of migrant parents, by age 9, Adam was already moving drugs for gangs. His name and voice have been changed.
Before, if you were going to kill someone, you got 1 million kroner, around 75 grand. But now the prices are so low that everyone kills. So now it's 100,000 kroner for one person.
Have you ever hurt people for money?
I've done some of those things, yeah.
This is an example of how deadly gang life can be. Here gangsters chase down their rivals, shooting numerous bullets into the car. This time, the victims survived. But Adam knows drug turf wars and jealousy can turn friends into enemies.
Has anyone ever come for you?
Yes, last time was 1 week ago.
1 week ago?
Yeah. They came to my gate, but the boys were there and caught them.
They were going to shoot you?
Yeah, but they didn't succeed. I know who's behind it, but they're done. They're not here anymore.
Faced with rising attacks, in autumn the government triggered emergency measures, including military support for the police. But the violence can break out without warning, as we soon found out.
So we've just got reports that an explosion has happened, so we're going to head to the north of Stockholm and find out what's going on.
Someone left explosives outside this block of apartments just before midnight. Residents were woken by a blast they said sounded like an earthquake.
Wow, that's the neighbor's windows.
Wow, so that's all been blown in?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, and the floor above as well.
Yeah, and there, and one of my friends and their family lives there.
Wow, so that must have been deafening when it went off for you, because you're just next door.
Yeah, like...
So close to where you live.
Close.
Neighbours come out to discuss the damage. Amazingly, no one was hurt.
The dog was put out.
Yeah, so this is a temporary...
Yeah.
I didn't see this back there, but I can see them now.
Gangs have left people feeling afraid to go out and unsafe staying in. While the violence is spreading, it's deprived migrant communities still bearing the brunt of the killings. Liban began a night watch after his 19-year-old son was gunned down. Hanad Liban wasn't part of a gang. At one point it said a murder was happening here every week.
Someone was killed in the pizza place.
Yeah.
Behind the back of the flats.
Yeah.
At the school.
Yes.
It's a lot of young men to die here.
Yes.
Sweden's past pro-immigration stance led to an influx of asylum seekers, but a lack of integration and opportunities left many isolated and prime for recruitment. These 18, 19 and 20-year-olds are easy to recruit as they don't have jobs, Liban tells me. They have nothing to do, they sit at home, work is hard to get, but on the other hand, they can make quick cash.
Sweden has totally failed with integration.
Police Superintendent Daniel Larsson agrees failed integration can feed the gangs. But on patrol in Uppsala, he says it's feuds fueling the violence.
We have murders, we have shootings, we have hand grenades attack.
The gang wars peaked in September when someone planted a bomb at a rival's relative's house. They were out, but an innocent neighbour was killed. Daniel shows us what's left.
Wow. So the dynamite was placed here?
Yeah, between the both houses.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
and it's just decimated.
Yeah,
it.
a big blast.
2 properties were destroyed. More than 50 others were damaged.
People were afraid, people was crying. So it was a sort of a war scene, actually.
Do you feel like Sweden is a bit at war with the gangs?
Yes. A low impact war.
Who's winning?
We.
Do you think the gangs think that?
No. But we are a bigger gang.
My father still comes here every day. His mission is that his candle doesn't burn out.
But gang members aren't the only ones getting hurt. Frida's brother Musa was murdered when he was 19.
This is his home now.
Shot in a case of mistaken identity, he had no links to gangs. One of those involved in his killing was just 15.
How can you continue to live with the fact that you have another person's blood on your hands? You took their life. You shattered their families.
This is where teenage gang murderers go.
Hello, I'm here for Sky News.
I've come to visit one of 3 high-security juvenile detention facilities. In 2022, around half of the suspects in gun-related murders were 15 to 20-year-olds.
And how many young people are you caring for here?
At the moment, 24.
How many of them are in here because of some sort of affiliation with gangs?
A majority.
Gangs deliberately choose teenagers as they get shorter sentences. A 17-year-old had a hand in this explosion, one of the worst of last year. He was jailed for 4 years for attempted murder after bombing a rival's relatives. While the government's debating adult prison sentences for teenage gang killers, we meet the head of the school at the centre, trying to rehabilitate them.
I still haven't found a young person who says, I would like to be a criminal.
Can a 15-year-old murderer become a functioning member of society?
Yes, I think so. I have to believe in that. Otherwise, I can't stand here.
But it will take more than belief to stop the flow of gang members filling Sweden's prisons. The government's looking at new plans to combat organised crime, but until they can compete with the cash, status and belonging offered by criminal groups, young people will keep on being recruited. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Sweden.
Well, one former Swedish gang member, Sebastian Staxet, is now working with young people to try to drive them away from joining those gangs, and he joins me now. Sebastian, good evening to you. First of all, just tell me just how violent, how dangerous was your life?
It was very violent and it was very dangerous. When you go out from your house, you don't know if somebody's going to stand there and shoot you. So you have to be very careful, especially when you have children and stuff like that. It was a shit life and full with trauma and PTSD.
Sebastian, I read that you had, this number is extraordinary, 38 friends who died during gang-related violence.
But 39 friends, and it's all from violence and drugs and stuff like that. So yeah, 39. It's now 39, unfortunately.
Wow. And Sebastian, what was your role in this? What were you doing?
But I was just a criminal. We were a pretty heavy gang in Sweden, so we did crimes, and we had beef with people, and it was violent and it was messy.
Now, your life changed around. I know you became a Christian. I know you got into music, but what was the thing that actually got you away from gang violence?
I met somebody who showed me another way. I met love, I met compassion, and I met mercy. You know, somebody who saw potential in me and not only problem. You know, the Swedish government, they had 2 crisis meetings. What they're gonna do with me and my friends? We were like gangster rappers and stuff like that. But I met a pastor, and he just saw through all the masks, and he just loved me, you know, and he loved me all the way to freedom, you know, to a new life. And I'm sitting here today as a new man, thanks to that man's love.
Which worked for you, Sebastian, but on a wider note, what is society? Why does Sweden have this problem so much worse than any other nation?
First of all, we got ghettos, and this is a ghetto problem. And if you create ghettos and a parallel society, you get problems. It's increased now in gun violence, but it's still ghetto problems. You know, young people, they have nobody to raise them. They're getting raised by social media. They got no stability. They got no safety, and they got no love. You know, so they get influenced by social media. They are in a very dangerous environment, and you know, the fashion is you should have Moncler, you should have Gucci, and then they want the money to buy that, and they got very short consequence thinking when they're like 14, 15. So they make really bad decisions.
Sebastian, thanks ever so much for joining us. Sebastian Staxet joining us, a former member of those gangs, and as you heard, now lost his 39th friend. Well, in Siobhan's report, you may remember there was that bomb attack in the city of Uppsala that killed a 25-year-old woman, despite her not actually being the intended target. Well, I've been speaking to the town's mayor, Erik Pelling, and I asked him where this tide of gang violence has come from and how he thought it could be stopped.
We still have a very low rate of criminality in Sweden. The welfare state is still pretty strong. But we also have had a history of several decades of deregulations, liberalizations on many aspects of in Swedish society, in the welfare system, on the housing issue, and also when it comes to immigration, and also when it comes to schooling. And all that combined has created quite a toxic mix.
But is there a particular Swedish element to this? Because lots of countries have got cultural challenges they've had to deal with. The Danes say there is a Swedish condition. Is there something specific that's gone wrong?
Well, probably, because we don't see this rate of shootings in other places in Europe right now. So something is particularly wrong in Sweden. It's hard to pinpoint what that is, but we have a serious problem, and that's obvious.
The Prime Minister of your country has drawn a pretty direct line between gang violence and immigration. Is that reasonable in your mind?
You can't isolate this to a problem of migration. The problem is much broader, and it has several causes. It's not an ethnic problem. It's not because people are from a certain country. The problem is self-grown here in Sweden. But failed migration policies is one part of it, yes.
I know, just one final thought. I mean, there's been a shooting in Finland today. We've seen various gun-related violent incidents across Europe in recent times. Where are all these guns, where these bombs, these weapons, where are they coming from? How do they get to Sweden?
Well, that's the big question, because most part of these guns, they are from ex-Yugoslavia, for example, and they are carried all through Europe to get to Sweden. How is that even possible? And we have quite tough regulations on weapons in Sweden, but some way they get here and they are used in Sweden on a higher rate than in other parts of Europe. So something we are doing wrong. And then one part of these guns are produced. Now it's easy to produce your own gun with 3D techniques and so on. So it's a mix.
Erik, thank you very much indeed. That's Erik Pelling from Uppsala. This is The World with me, Adam Parsons. Next up, Several people are arrested after a fire at a nightclub in Istanbul leaves 29 dead. A fire that broke out during renovation work at one of Istanbul's most popular nightclubs has killed at least 29 people. Several people have now been arrested, including managers of the club. Here's my report. Flames pouring out of a high-rise building in Istanbul in the middle of the day. On the ground level, people run for safety as smoke billows up from the basement, home to a well-known nightclub. It had been undergoing renovation work. The blackened corner of the building witnessed to the effects of this deadly blaze. Emergency services filled the surrounding streets, evacuating residents and also construction workers. Most of the dead are thought to be their colleagues who'd been working on the building. The flames ripped through the 2 floors of the Masquerade nightclub just before 1 in the afternoon. It's thought the fire started in there. This club now an acrid shell.
This is one of Istanbul's best-known nightclubs. It's got a capacity of about 1,500 people. It hosts really big-name DJs and live acts, not only from Turkey but from around the world. It's the kind of place where you have kind of VIP tables, table service. You know, it is not a kind of backstreet basement nightclub as you might think. It's a really famous venue here in Istanbul.
The cause of the blaze is unclear. But the city's mayor says the work should not have been going ahead, saying the club did not have the right construction permit. 6 people, including members of the club management, have now been detained for questioning. A famous venue, now the scene of an infamous fire. To Finland now, where a suspect aged just 12 has been detained by police after admitting to a school shooting in which another pupil was killed and 2 others were seriously injured. Sky's Rachel Venables reports.
They waited by the school gates, parents desperate for news after a student brought a gun into the school this morning and started firing. 3 children aged 12 were shot. 1 did not survive.
One of the victims died almost immediately at this location in the school, and 2 other victims were transported to the hospital in Helsinki.
The attack happened here at the Virtola school in Vantaa, north of Helsinki. The suspect, also 12 years old, was later arrested in the capital. Police say he was still holding the handgun, which was owned by a family member.
Well, this is a terrible thing that had happened, and we are all very, very strongly sad and shocked. I really don't see any need for guns or handguns in Finland.
Gun legislation was tightened in Finland after 2 devastating school shootings in 2007 and 2008, in which 15 students and 3 members of staff were killed. But gun ownership's still high in a country where target shooting and hunting is popular. It's thought there are more than 1.5 million licensed firearms, amongst a population of just 5.6 million people. As the police investigation works to uncover what happened here and why, the Nordic nation will no doubt be re-evaluating its relationship with guns, all too aware that a family sent their child to school this morning for them to never come home. Rachel Venables, Sky News.
Let's get back with our panel now, the Independent's chief international correspondent, Beau True, and the former UK ambassador to the UN, Sir Mark Lyle-Grant. And Mark, I mean, in Finland, we have a child who's gone rogue with a gun. In Sweden, mayhem. Does Europe have a problem with these guns, these weapons that seem to float around?
Well, certainly that is the case. You heard in your report on Sweden that a lot of these guns are coming out of ex-Yugoslavia, out of the Balkans. And that is where most of the guns come into the United Kingdom, also from the Balkans. When I was National Security Advisor, this was a big focus in preventing those weapons coming into the UK. And happily, I think our law enforcement agencies, intelligence agencies on the whole have done a pretty good job. So although some of our cities have problems with gang violence, it tends to be resolved with knives more than guns. Clearly that's not happening in Sweden, and they clearly have a problem in controlling the border and preventing these weapons coming in. But they're coming from the old Yugoslav wars, the Bosnian wars, the Serbia, Kosovo in the 90s. That's where these guns are coming from.
And Belle, another really interesting element of what happened in Sweden is that the politicians who are making a link between this wave of violence and immigration are doing really well in the polls.
Yeah, I mean, this is the sort of, I guess, talking point when we talk about this issue. But I think there's probably some other elements going on here as well. I think maybe there's a slight demonisation of some of these communities. I think what's interesting about Sweden is the growing inequality in the wealth gap, basically. It's, I think, the fastest growing wealth gap in the region. And there's also concerns about the privatisation of the welfare system. As far as I'm aware, I think Sweden's among the sort of highest proportion of for-profit companies that run welfare, the welfare state, essentially. And there's even reports that possibly gangs are getting involved in that as well. So I think there's obviously going to be multiple reasons for this occurring, and I think just demonising, one population, the immigrant population, is not the way to go. But yeah, I think what is interesting, particularly for Sweden, is the growing wealth gap and how that might, exacerbate tensions on the street.
It certainly will. Well, I'm glad you were talking about wealth, because that is something we're going to come back to in just a moment. You are watching The World with me, Adam Parsons, and next up, the world's richest are getting richer, and there are more billionaires than ever before. Could more good be done with all that money?
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place for news.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent and I'm based here in Beijing.
We help you understand the world with us. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Well, there are now more billionaires in the world than ever before. 2,781 of them, to be precise, according to Forbes magazine, and that's $1 billion. At the top of the Forbes rich list is Bernard Arnault, with a net worth of $233 billion US. He oversees an empire of 75 fashion and cosmetic brands, including Louis Vuitton. Now, second is Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX CEO. He's got $195 billion to get by on. Then there's Amazon's founder, Jeff Bezos, got $194 billion. The wealth of the top three, then, that is $622 billion, twice the amount the UN Food and Agriculture Organization estimates it will cost each year to end world hunger. Well, Beltru and Samark are still here. OK, Tamar, I'm going to get you to take a moral position here. Is it good for the world to have people who have more money than you can imagine?
Look, I think it's what people do with the money that's important. Look at the Gates Foundation. They give away more money in development aid than 95% of Western countries. So they're doing a lot of philanthropic work with their aid. So I think if you use the money sensibly, then it's good. A lot of people obviously don't. But what's interesting about those numbers, I mean, it's staggering that there are 2,700, but look at the people who've dropped out since last year. 133 Chinese have dropped out and only 8 Americans. And that's a sign of what's happening in the Chinese economy, which is kind of interesting.
I shall reserve my sympathy for former billionaires. Belle, I mean, it is an interesting question. Look at Elon Musk. I mean, nearly $200 billion. And that's a man with a lot of power.
So I think my first response is, number one, there's no women in the top 3.
Yep.
And that's really important. But I think...
Taylor Swift, though, now a billionaire.
She is a billionaire. That's the only fact that I do know. Yes, Taylor Swift is now a billionaire. But I think what's key here is that the people in the top 3 are not doing philanthropic work. And even those that are doing it, it means that you have lots of control in the hands of one person. Because even though the Bill Gates Foundation is doing incredible work, that is ultimately quite a small group of people making key decisions. And when we're talking about fixing the world, that needs to be on a state level, on a government level. We need to be able to, especially with climate change, if there's a handful of people doing this of their own projects, then I fear that there's too much power in the hands of
a nice problem to have. Mark, Belle, thank you ever so much for your company. That is all for tonight's edition of The World. News at 10 is coming up next. More on the British aid workers killed in Gaza. I'll be back at 9 o'clock tomorrow.